All right, well, let's get started. Welcome, everyone. This is the 8th and final meeting for the Climate Action Task Force as it's currently configured and arranged. We have a very full agenda this evening, so I'm going to ask that we all try to do our part to keep the conversation out of the weeds and at the kind of, at the mezza level that it needs to be at to move through our agenda. I am going to share a presentation tonight just to help us get through and help see some of the stuff that needs to happen. Before that, I know that we're doing a little bit of tracking, and for the most part, we can see who's on. But could the person with the phone number ending in 1452, could you let us know who you are?
Yes, hi, this is Joni Lynch. Thank you.
Hi, Joni. Thanks for letting us know, and thanks for being here. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Actually, I need to get this into presenter mode. Give me 1 second. Okay, is everyone seeing the regular PowerPoint view? Okay, excellent. All right, well, we covered that already. Our agenda for this evening is a public comment period. To the best of my knowledge, there is no public present. See Francie confirming that. And then we have final approval of round 2 recommendations, an update on the governance recommendation and the ad hoc committee that created that. So we'll be looking for approval of that by the group. Approval of the final report, and there's a couple different steps in there that we're going to take to cover that. And then we're going to discuss the logistics for a presentation to council, and then do a wrap up and next steps. Is there anything that anyone would like to discuss that you feel is not probably included in this agenda?
One small thing that may come up under the approval of the final report, but I was just talking to some of the others before we started about perhaps having some sort of single paragraph cover statement from the whole committee.
So thank you, Peter, for bringing that up, and let's cover that when we discuss the final report as a suggested addition for that. Thank you for that piece. Anything else? Okay, well, if something comes up, let us know. We do want to make sure that we cover everything that needs to be talked about. So we already confirmed there's not a public to comment. So moving on to final approval of round 2 recommendations. So there is, first of all, the revised water recommendation. And Francie, I believe you were going to talk us through both the process of how this changed as well as what a summary of the recommendation is.
Yeah, and Karen is here and helped finalize this. So Karen, please feel free if I miss anything, but the key, I think, changes that were made, and Lynette's here as well. So either of you feel free to quickly jump in if needed. But I felt that the key changes were the goal isn't just focused on parks and open space water consumption, but overall citywide water consumption. The goal has been adjusted from 50% for parks and open space to 35 to 40% from a 2019 baseline, again, of overall water consumption by 2025. And I know there are some comments about how does this connect to climate change, so it was specifically addressed in the recommendation that climate change will impact access to future water supplies, so water conservation is an important component to adapting to climate change.
So are there any any additions that anyone else who worked on this recommendation would like to make to share the recommendation with the group?
It's fine.
Any clarifying questions from anyone who didn't work on this recommendation?
I'm still thinking we should check that against the data that the water department has, because this is a huge reduction, and the means in there, the means that are now in the recommendation don't look to me like they would produce this level of reduction.
Francie, do you want to speak to that at all? Because I know you talked quite a bit with folks about that.
Yeah, and we did discuss that there would need to be an evaluation of both staff capacity as well as the budget, especially for, I believe there was a call out in the recommendation for a budget for landscape transitions. So when we were reviewing it, I think it was clear from the members who were helping to finalize it that staff would still need to do significant work to understand the budget to do this and the funding that would be needed to do this. And we can make that, add a line to make that clearer in the recommendation report if needed.
Do you have a reference, like a study or something, that predicts the need for needing to reduce water consumption this much?
Karen, let me unmute you. Or you need to unmute.
I think I'm unmuted now. I think that that as we look at a lot of these goals, we aren't sure exactly how we're going to reach most of them or all of them. And it's sort of like saying 100% renewable energy. There's items out there that say, yes, you can do it, go forward. But if you don't set a goal and you don't work towards it, you'll never even start. And so we could go back and do a big study, or we can just say, we know there's going to be less water and we need to begin planning for probably this much reduction. We know that some of our water comes from the western slope. We know that forces over there are saying they want the water to stop coming. We know that there's lawsuits about bringing water over here. And we know that the southwest area of our state is in an extreme drought, and there's probably going to be aridification in that area and become permanently arid. So we need to plan. We can't just say, well, I don't think it's possible by just changing turf grass. We're going to have a group that looks at what's possible and how can we begin to use less water, because bringing all the water over here and using it hurts all of the stream uses on the western slope, you know, and some of ours comes from meltwater on the Front Range side, but we need to start this because there will be a shortage of water. We use it not very sparingly, and I'm you know, I have a big yard and water a lot, so, you know, not grass, I have a lot of xeriscape, but, you know, it's just time that we start planning.
Fair enough.
I would also just offer the group that Denver Water recently did do a large statewide water analysis and has some pretty compelling predictions about the number of households short of water that we will be by 2050. So that may be an additional resource worth referencing and or reviewing.
With regard to the second bullet, is there any timeline? Is this by 2025 or 2030 or 2050 or what? It doesn't.
Stated in the recommendation is by 2025.
Okay. Maybe that could go into the bullet point too.
Yeah, and the presentation is for us this evening, but it is included in the document. So
Right.
yes, that would have been fair to put it in the presentation tonight. But any other clarifying questions or concerns about this recommendation before we move on to voting? All right, hearing none, we're going to do this in the same format that we did last time. So first we'll start with any who are, any who are thumbs down or opposed to the recommendation. I don't think I can see everyone right now, so you'll have to, I think on video we've only got Marcia, Karen, Peter, and Jess. So you'll have to unmute yourself or speak up if you would like to express a thumbs down. And Kitty is.
You should
for her
have me.
dinner.
This is
Oh,
Lynette.
there you are.
Yeah.
There you are. I see you. Thanks. Oh, and Alejandro's there too.
I'm on here
My
too.
view, I was able to see a little bit more. Oh, there you all are. Look at your beautiful faces.
Hi,
Okay. Hi, Michelle. All right. So I can see most of you now. So anyone who is thumb sideways or a conditional approval of this, and then thumbs up gets to be everyone else. So that's kind of how the voting ends up working. Okay. All right. So that was a unanimous approval or thumbs up. I think, Lisa, we may have a quorum. Can you confirm that?
Let's see if I can count everybody that's on here.
I think we have 9.
So we don't. We have 19 members.
So just so that you all are aware, we will have to round out the voting via email for those who are not present this evening. But we will capture your votes this evening, and then we will seek to get to an 80% approval by the entire task force.
Lisa, would you send out that Denver water report link?
Yeah, Francie and I have not seen that yet. So we were just, we would track it down, but we can share it with you guys.
Sure. Who was it?
That
Josie?
was
You mentioned
Josie.
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
If you have it handy and can send it to us, that would be great.
I would also have to track it down.
Then don't worry about it. We'll find it.
All right. Great. I was in some meetings regarding the National Western Center that one, there were members from Denver Water there. So, okay. So, sorry, that was a little convoluted, but we, for all of those present on this call, we have a unanimous vote in favor of approving the revised water recommendation. So moving on. So now we're coming to the point where we're going to do final approval of all recommendations. So this isn't the full report. So we will vote on approving the entire report as well. But this is about the final recommendations to continue to council as they stand. And I think it is, so, well, Lisa, if it's okay with you, I think I want to cover the writing logistics. But as you all have written them and understand them to be, are there any objections or major objections to any of the recommendations before we move forward to council with the full set? Okay. So anyone who, so hearing no major objections, are there any major or conditional concerns? Okay.
I raised one, I guess, in my comments that seems a little pedantic maybe, but it was just about the numbering system. I don't think we want to put forth 5 number 1 recommendations and 6 number 3 recommendations and stuff. It's going to be impossible for anybody to discuss the report. So I would urge that we number them 1 through 28 or A1, B1, C1, something like that. Either way, but that's just my thought.
Peter, we did see that recommendation, and both Lisa and I also liked it. And our plan was to go with AR1 for adaptation resilience 1, AR2, or EO1 for education outreach 1, and then go by that.
Cool, that's great.
Okay, so hearing, thank you, Peter, for that, and hearing no major or minor objections, we will assume that all on the call are in favor. Okay. So governance update. There was a subcommittee who met. Oops, what is this? I'm going the wrong direction, I apologize. Give me 1 second. Okay, so there was an ad hoc group that met to discuss governance after the last meeting. And I believe Lisa is going to share with us the final recommendation, or not the final, but the recommended governance solution based on their conversation. So we'll start with sharing what the recommendation is and then see if anyone has clarifying questions.
Yeah, so I met on Monday with Karen and Joni and Marcia and Ale, and we talked about the discussion that we had at the last meeting around governance and what our options are to try to land on a proposal to bring to you all tonight. And this is what we landed on after a lot of discussion was integrate the oversight around implementation and progress of the Climate Action Task Force report recommendations and a reporting component into the Sustainability Advisory Board with a recommendation that they appoint what we were calling champions, essentially to follow and report specifically on progress of priority recommendations that come out of City Council. We probably can't have one for every single recommendation we have, especially because we're not going to implement all of them at once. But as we prioritize and as we start to implement those recommendations, that we can have a champion that's really whose job it is to really make sure that that recommendation is being implemented and that we're making progress according to the report. So that's kind of the first piece of it. And also that we'll encourage Climate Action Task Force members to follow and participate in the Sustainability Advisory Board. As I mentioned last time, that in order to be a formal member of that board, it is an application process and you have to be appointed by council. However, the meetings are just like City Council meetings where they're always open to members of the public. People can always come and observe. There's always a period of time at the beginning for public invited to be heard. So there's definitely an opportunity for folks, and we would encourage people to stay part of that group as well so that you all can participate in that process. And then the second piece is to form ad hoc technical committees as needed. So as we get into those implementation of different recommendations, that we can put a call out to folks for specific, to share specific expertise in wanting to acknowledge that there's a lot of work that can be augmented by volunteers, not just in the, we kind of think about that typically more in the really hands-on way of planting trees or pulling weeds or whatever. But there's a lot of expertise in the community that we can call upon for in the planning stages of the recommendations as well. So those are kind of the main governance components. And then the second or the third and final piece was incorporating recommendations into existing plans such as the council work plan, because that is council's kind of official document saying that these are our priorities and this is how we want to move them forward. And that really puts that a priority on staff and that direction on staff as well to make sure that we're following and implementing those recommendations and those goals and policies as well. So is there anything that anyone who was on that call on Monday wants to add to that I missed? Nope. Okay. Any clarifying questions that people have?
All right, looks like we're ready for a vote. And I'll be surprised if the outcomes are other than I think they will be, but so any major objections? That'd be a thumbs down. Any conditions that you would like to see incorporated into this recommendation? And then I would assume the rest is all in favor. Thumbs up. All right, you guys are either just been worn out by this process or everybody's in a good mood tonight, but we are getting through the agenda quickly, which is.
And real quick, Josie, before you switch to the next piece, so if you all notice, there is a governance section in the report, and there's nothing in there currently because we're waiting to have this conversation. So what I'll do is write this up essentially and drop this into that section there. So this will be included. And I do want to reiterate that council has the ultimate decision-making power. So this is just our recommendation to them. They will get to discuss and decide how they want to see things move forward. So I do want to have that caveat, but this will be the recommendation from the task force that goes to council.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so the final report, we've already had a little bit of conversation on that. Peter has suggested that we incorporate sort of a letter from the task force and maybe something that is a little bit warmer, a little bit more inspiring, something of that nature. So we can talk about the logistics to incorporate that. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the about sort of how the report is being finalized. So we're going to jump into that. So starting at the top, the minor changes are being incorporated per your written feedback. Your feedback on the final report is due today. If for some reason you are not able to do that today, but you are on track to do that within the next, say, 24 or 36 hours, and you really would like to get your feedback incorporated, please email Francie. She is the one who is really quarterbacking the finalization of the report at this time. But today is the deadline. Today's not over, so you're welcome to provide feedback. If there are any larger concerns or questions that anyone brings up through the current feedback process of the entire report, they may end up in this section titled Unresolved Comments. And I would like to spend a moment talking about that section because there were a few people who raised questions about what does this mean? Why is this section here? And the intention of the unresolved comment section was a place to note that a comment was made somewhere in the development of the recommendations. So through task force review or staff review that was that may not have been addressed by the task force recommendation as it was redeveloped and rewritten. That is your choice. So there was no mandate that you had to incorporate feedback that you received from each other or from staff. It's been a way for us to track essentially the comments that have been made that are still outstanding, but there's no obligation for the task force to address those comments. So let me pause there. There's a couple other points to speak about related to this. But
And I just want to make it clear that the unresolved comments after this will not be included in the final report. That was just for you all.
Good.
okay. One other order of business about the final report. So Amy made edits that were primarily focused on copy editing, formatting, and just kind of generally cleaning up the document. But we did identify that in doing so, she removed a couple of items and sentences that were hoped to improve readability and clarity, but that in some instances there were task force members that were concerned that some of the key items were changed or removed. So we actually reviewed all of the edits and restored any substantive changes that were made back to its original content. And there was some discretion that had to be used in determining which of those comments were substantive versus which were clarifying. It may be some impetus to examine closely, particularly the recommendations that you wrote, confirming that the content has the integrity that you would like it to have. However, we don't want to circulate another version of the report for people to review, but we do want to ensure that each of you feels confident in the final version of the report. So we're proposing that we wait to circulate the final version until we have any of our current revisions from the task force incorporated. And that would be, again, hopefully by this evening, or we could stretch the date out a couple of days. And then the final version will go out on the 14th for a once over. And at that time, if there's anything you feel like got changed or missed, we'll address it before submitting to council. So I know that was kind of a lot. So let's just pause and revisit any of that needs to be revisited to assure that everyone feels confident and I guess that's all, just that you feel confident about the contents of the final report.
This is Peter. Is there any way you can be more specific about these changes back that were made that none of us have seen or know about? I mean, if you could say recommendation 6 has been altered or put back the way it was because we didn't like such and such, that might help us. It seems, yeah.
That would be Francie, who is the keeper of that knowledge right now, because she very diligently went through all of those changes. So I'll let her speak to that.
Yeah. For example, in the workforce development one, which I know, Peter, you worked on, so I wanted to give this one as an example. I think in the cleaning up process, some certain references to ensuring it didn't completely remove references to livable wage and ensuring a diverse workforce, but there were some references to it throughout the recommendation that were removed. And actually, Joni, I put some back, and then Joni also emailed us and mentioned that she'd like it to be more thoroughly referenced. So I went through and I looked through every single time that was referenced in your original one that you sent to us and made sure that was back in the workforce development. So it isn't adding any new content that you hadn't already written. It was just checking that sometimes when sentences were compiled, a sentence or condensed to be clearer, sometimes some wording got left out, and most of the recommendations it was very just copy editing, but the workforce and the public health one were probably the two ones that we felt there was some language that needed to be put back in. And both, so we worked on both of those. But I think
That's good. That helps.
Any additional thoughts or questions either about the editing process that we just spoke of or about the final report that have not been brought up so far? All right, as I said, you all are in a rather notably agreeable mood this evening. So we will move, okay. So then the next conversation that we wanted to have about the final report is updating our you on the conversation from the Just Transitions Plan Committee, and then making sort of a final direction on the incorporation of that work into the final report. So, the language on here isn't as clean as it could be. Oh, I see. Okay, never mind. I'm confusing myself. So the task force, you all chose to integrate equity throughout the climate action report and the recommendations, as opposed to having a separate topical area focused on equity and on justice. So that has been integral to your development of recommendations and the approach that that you all made. Lisa, is this something that, or Francie, was this content that you were giving, or am I okay to go forward with this? I'm all of a sudden questioning our process here. So I'm happy to go ahead and present this, but I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be one of you.
Oh, sorry. Either way, I'm happy to jump in, and then if people have specific questions, I'll probably have Francie speak to that since she spoke with the task force, but it's fine if you want to continue with it too. Either way, it's fine for me.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and do this piece? I think that would be most appropriate, actually.
Okay. So as Josie was talking about at that very first meeting, when we identified what our subgroup areas were, people identified equity as a primary component, and we decided to weave that all through. And so as she was saying, that's been very integral. That's been a lot of our focus on our interaction with the Just Transition Plan Committee through our joint meeting and things like that. And then also in the climate emergency resolution itself, it does talk about the importance of frontline communities participating in the decision-making and planning process around climate action. So this has been a very big part, and you see in the report, we wrote up a section around equity and why it was critical to climate action work. And we had brought up a discussion last time around the Just Transition Plan Committee presenting alongside of the Climate Action Task Force, and there was a lot of back and forth around that and not really a resolution. And we followed up with an email to say, you know, in honor of the equity and the climate action or the climate emergency resolution, which really says that frontline communities should participate in the decision-making and planning process, that we thought that decision actually should go to the climate action or the Just Transition Plan Committee. So Francie brought that up with them at their final meeting. And they confirmed that they would like the outcomes of their work to be incorporated into the Climate Action Task Force report. As part of the report, because they want to see that also alongside of the Climate Action Task Force recommendations as well. And so the proposed structure that we have here would be similar to the way the Climate Action Task Force recommendations are. So as you know, in the report, there's like a summary section of the Climate Action Task Force recommendations, and then the full recommendations, and a lot of supporting information is in the appendices. And so similarly, we would have a Just Transition Plan Committee equity recommendation section after the Climate Action Task Force recommendations. And the way that their recommendations are written are more in summary form as it is. So if you had a chance to look at their draft report that Francie sent out, you can see that their recommendations are more along the lines of what we have in our SMART goal summaries. So that would be included in a section after the Climate Action Task Force report, recommendations, and then the full outcomes, so supporting information from their process would be in an appendix as well. So that's what we wanted to bring to you guys. Francie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that explained it well. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay. So we just want to make sure that is agreeable with the task force before we go ahead and put that in there. And again, like I said, when we put out that email, the majority of you folks, I think there were 2 people that didn't respond to me on that email. So 17 of the 19 task force members did respond, and the majority of folks were in favor essentially of allowing the Just Transition Plan Committee to determine how they wanted their recommendations to get incorporated into the report. And then also we'll have a follow-up conversation in a minute about the presentation piece. So I guess I'll stick with kind of our process here. Are there any major objections to that people want to voice?
I just want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a group that continues to meet after we submit our report, that's going to kind of follow up on what's being done, what's happening? And if so, are they going to be included in that group?
Are you speaking about the Just Transition Plan Committee or the Climate Action Task Force?
The Just Transition Committee. I mean, how are they going to work in any future meetings? How are we going to work together?
So the governance conversation from this group, I'll go back to that earlier conversation that we had, will be incorporated into the oversight of the Sustainability Advisory Board, because we already have that structure in place. And then the Just Transition Plan Committee, Francie's in conversation with them right now to determine how best to move forward with that group and to continue to look at how to implement the recommendations that come out of that group.
I have a comment somewhat related to this. First of all, I apologize. It's been really hard for me to be on top of the Climate Action Task Force. So I've been late with emails, etc. But I've skimmed through the summary that I thought it was very well done, and it was incorporating the Just Transition portion really well. But because of the COVID crisis, I felt while reading it that another category that I think needs to be somewhat reassured are business owners, and who, because after the crisis, I think that a lot of businesses have been sort of compromised and maybe struggling to survive. So I felt that maybe that there were a few points, and I haven't submitted my comments. I'll try to do it as soon as I can within the end of tomorrow. But I felt that, even just small sentences could be maybe used, added, or slightly modified in order to give the reader the assurance that all of these is not only taking care of the climate, not only taking care of minorities and sensitive parts of the population, but also taking into account the economical aspects, which I thought it wasn't highlighted enough in the summary, at least. And I imagine that will be the most read portion of the whole protocol. So that I just wanted to throw it at you all and see what you think.
I think that's a good suggestion. One way we might handle it, at least a little bit, would be that if we do decide in a minute to try to add some sort of very brief overall statement on the front of the whole thing, it would be something that could easily be mentioned in there and therefore would be seen pretty clearly up front. I think it's a good point.
So a couple of, I guess a couple of thoughts. The report as it stands is incorporating 3 major pieces of work. One is the work of the task force. 2 is the work of the Just Transition Plan Committee, if we incorporate that into this report. And 3 is the education and outreach activities, which primarily come from the questionnaire that we did. So we did the public questionnaire where we had about 350 residents respond to some climate actions, and we did some public outreach that got cut short a little bit because of COVID. So right now there are 3 major pieces of work that have been conducted somewhat concurrently since December, and this report is primarily meant to represent that work. There were businesses that responded to the questionnaire, albeit they were limited. So I think that from what I'm hearing, acknowledging that COVID has had a major impact on businesses, particularly in the letter from the task force, would be a really appropriate place to do that. And there may be an additional place to acknowledge the economic components of what is being discussed within the report. However, given that there hasn't been sort of an economic focus in particular, you know, we clearly can't put a whole section toward that, but it was kind of included in every recommendation around the financials and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to kind of first bring that into a little bit of clarity for the group, and then bring us back to this particular question that was unresolved last time. I think Francie's pup has a couple things to say about this. To bring us back to a question that was unresolved last time about incorporating the work from the Just Transition Plan Committee and their guidelines around bringing equity and justice into climate action into this holistic report, so that those 3 pieces of work are all culminated into a single report. And that is the particular thing that we are looking to decide on tonight. And the context that Lisa gave around how equity has been integral to the thinking on the development of the climate action recommendations from the get-go, and how that may fit into the overall report. So just, you know, we're in a pretty big space here with a lot of different aspects, but that's the piece that we need to kind of focus on tonight is the task force comfortable with, and do they approve having a single report that highlights the work of both groups and the education and outreach questionnaire into a single document? And as a reminder, Lisa said she heard back from about 17 of the 19 with primarily favorable direction on that. So we just need to confirm that tonight. And then obviously we're going to need to follow up with a few people via email. So reframing the question, are there any concerns that anyone would like to bring up related to incorporating all of this work into a single report?
Yeah, Josie, I probably, you all already know this, but this is Marcia and I'm back. Are you going to incorporate, meaning you're going to meld and weave through those recommendations, or are you saying it's going to be concatenated.
So currently the idea is that so we have the front end of the report that has the executive, the background, the executive summary, the summary of the recommendations. So those came out in the terms of the SMART goals, and then a couple of sentences that describe each recommendation. And then there's the governance recommendation. And then after that, there's an appendices with the full recommendations that are in greater detail. So that's the current structure of the document. The proposal is that there would be an additional section that has the Just Transitions Guidance Summary. So again, short format, similar to the SMART goals, incorporated into the main body of the report. And then the full contents of the Just Transitions report would have an appendix that would go after the full recommendations from the task force. So if you can envision, there's a couple major sections of the main body of the report, and then a major appendices with the full recommendations, and another appendices with the full contents from the Just Transitions group.
So I read the things we had to comment on. We still don't have their report, correct? It wasn't attached to this last batch, or was it? And I didn't read it.
It was attached.
Yeah.
It was attached. Okay, so we have it and we can.
There may be a couple minor edits made. We're still waiting, like you all are making some minor edits. Folks are sending in some minor edits, but it's very close to their final report. It was attached as a separate PDF.
Okay.
Seems to me that we have the possibilities of creating something that's more confusing than it is inclusive. And I'm not clear whether this is a report being presented by the Climate Action Task Force, and that we have incorporated the Just Transition material, and we've incorporated the public outreach information, but I don't want to make it appear as though it's coming from 5 different directions, and that it has the look of being put together by 3 committees. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I just want to make sure that
I raised questions about the title page where I don't have it in front of me now, but I would like to know, both as an author and as a reader and recipient, who put this together, who's behind it, who do I blame if I think it's stupid, all those things and I don't want to get us started in a way that looks nebulous. I mean, is it my understanding, and which may be wrong, is that the Climate Action Task Force was appointed. It has consulted with these other 2 entities and has incorporated those into its final report. Am I getting that right, or is that misstated?
Well, yeah, I think the same concerns that Peter has. I feel like it dilutes the message because there's a different level of information, or at least a different axis of information. The people on the Just Transition Committee don't know very much about renewable energy or land restoration or anything like that at all. But they may have insights that we don't have on how change is going to affect them. But that's a different subject. And
sorry,
go ahead,
I thought you were done. You can continue.
Oh, well, it's just I think it is important not to mix those 2 messages. You know, for the most part, our recommendations are pretty fact-based. They are recommendations based on research we did, you know, the IPCC report and blah, 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 you know, lots of stuff where people were making predictions and, you know, based on measured data like the amount, like the rate of increase in CO2 equivalent in the atmosphere over the last 15 years, you know, things that we know are real. The Just Transition Plan is different. The Just Transition Plan is about people's hopes and fears for about what these recommendations are, and that's something different. I think we should talk about those separately.
Let me pull up the recommendations. I think that might be helpful because the Just Transition Plan, I would not say is about people's hopes and fears. It's more about, they were giving recommendations on how they're all for implementing climate action and are in support of climate action. And a lot of the recommendations were things that could help expand and improve that climate action. None of the recommendations were saying don't do this or don't do that. So if it's helpful for the group, I can pull up some of them and share them. If that can maybe better, since I don't think everyone had a chance to review that, would that be helpful?
Well, if it's just me that hasn't read it, then I'll read it over the weekend. But if more than just me has that concern, then maybe it would be. I want to keep us out of the weeds, so maybe coming back to it. I would like to understand why it's so important to present them all at once.
So,
I have a question.
yes, Michelle, go ahead.
So I was wondering, because I have been, just with my job and everything, reading a couple of articles about how in Minneapolis, for their climate action plan, they didn't consult any groups like this, like the Just Transition Committee, and how that implemented and how it fractured relationships and created more racial tensions, and pretty much failed as a plan. When it first came out, it was like very exciting, and then it came out that they didn't take into account a lot of low income or people of color's opinions. So yeah, I was wondering, like thinking about that framing for what we're talking about. And I was wondering if we're just combining them, are we is the Just Transition Committee, are they going to be also reviewing our recommendations and giving feedback on that, or approving it or not? Or is that just part of it, separate? They're not looking at it again.
Isn't that how they came up with their recommendations, is by reviewing ours?
So, okay, so there's a lot of questions on the table right now. Let's try to take them one at a time. And I will do my best to articulate what I think I understand from sort of from a third-party perspective, and then people can help clarify as needed and as appropriate. I will say that nationally, the conversation around just and equitable transitions for climate action and toward clean energy are increasingly becoming a single conversation. In climate action planning nationally, the conversation around how do we lead with equity in our climate action, and how do we lead even more specifically with race in climate action, was a conversation that had started several years ago, and to Michelle's point, is now being amplified tremendously through the civil unrest and protesting that's happened over the past couple of weeks. So that's just a bit of the sort of national conversation, and I'm sure that Lisa could confirm this in, you know, her peers around the country who gather to talk about climate action planning. This has been the conversation, or one of the biggest conversations in that arena over the past several years. So I wanted to start there for one. For two, my understanding is that the city of Longmont has been looking at and discussing how to integrate equity into all of its sustainability efforts, and that there was an equity plan created a few years back, and that in that equity plan there was a recommendation that instead of equity being seen and conducted as a separate line of thinking for various plans, so any major plan, this being one of them, that instead of equity being a parallel effort, and we've only made some progress on that from my perspective in this work. We're working on getting it to be more of an integrated approach to climate, or towards equity and major city planning efforts. And that is the intention, is to bring those more together. So that's the city work that I understand so far. And Francie, it sounded like maybe, or it looked like maybe there was something that you wanted to add to that.
I want to clarify that the city does not currently have an equity plan. I believe the integrating equity throughout the climate action report came from a desire in earlier climate action task force meetings to integrate equity throughout. The city doesn't currently have an equity strategy. That is one of the goals of the sustainability plan, is to develop an equity strategy in the future.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So
for
the thing I would say is that it seems like the individual recommendations do each contain an analysis of what the equity concerns are, you know, who benefits from this or that specific action, who could be hurt by it, and mitigations for that. And that was what I took as, you know, the mission all along was integrating equity. Changing the mission of the climate action task force at the last minute is a different thing. So I'm uncomfortable with it. I feel like it's policy being made by people who don't have a mandate to make policy, and I feel like it loses control of the message. But you know, it may be as among other things a technical writer. In my career, it's very easy to put in something small and have it change the meaning of a whole document, and that's my concern.
So I think that I would like to follow Francie's suggestion that we have a quick look, because I'm guessing that you are not the only person who has not been able to get through all of the content. And I think that you're making a valid point, Marcia, and that without seeing what those recommendations are, because it's more of an approach to how to think about equity as the city enacts climate action. It's more of an approach to how to go about thinking about and including historically disadvantaged voices or marginalized populations. So let's take just a couple of minutes and show those so that we can see the nature of them, because then we'll all have, I think, be working from the same page around what is the nature of recommendation that we're talking about. and that may help move the conversation along as well. So Francie, can you bring those up? Oh, and I may need to allow you to share.
Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes. If you can make it bigger, that would be really helpful though.
Okay, so there's kind of two main summaries. One is essentially an equity assessment, that it's important to build an understanding of equity and climate action, but the most important thing here is an equity lens, which you all got to use during the joint meeting, the importance of applying the equity lens. I'm going to move to their main recommendations, and they did add a note. They wanted to add a note about considering all of this, considering the COVID-19 crisis. So a lot of their recommendations were around marketing engagement. They had a big recommendation on the importance of engaging cultural brokers and community navigators. They thought it was very important to engage and partner with nonprofit and business partnerships to develop culturally relevant messaging to make sure that, let's say if you're doing translation, don't do a direct translation. Make sure it's actually culturally translated, so you're not saying a phrase in English that everyone would understand in English, but it's absolute nonsense in Spanish or another language. They thought it was important to also address stigma associated with action and make sure you're really highlighting the benefits of that action. They recommended a lot of targeted outreach, targeted social media posts, radio and TV ads, door-to-door canvassing. They recommended that city employees should be participating in promoting climate action initiatives. So that was the kind of a lot of the marketing outreach sections. They had a data and research, and they thought it was very important when developing and implementing recommendations to use data and research to understand frontline communities, to understand communities' attitudes, interests, motivations, etc., and really use data. They felt that it's really important when developing a climate action program to evaluate and understand barriers. So understand access to internet and phone, citizen status, lack of documentation, how that might impact, understand language barriers, and think through all of these things for when implementing the climate action recommendation. Think through situational differences, think through why someone might want to participate in the program, how can it be adjusted to better meet the motivations of residents and businesses, how it can be better tied to priorities residents' life. So tying a program that really helps also with affordable housing might get people really much more excited and passionate about it. They also felt it was important to think about impacted workers. They also had some similar recommendations. Not as in depth as your all's recommendation, but just kind of highlighting different groups to partner with when doing job training. Also felt it was important to understand health and safety and tie that to understand that health and safety is an important part and should be tied into climate action recommendations. Important to address cost burdens, so understand the financial burdens of low-income households and figure out how can these climate action programs also assist the financial burdens of low-income households. So consider questions like, are there assistance programs or other programs that this climate action can partner with? Developing community-based programs, they felt that it's important to build the self-reliance and maybe have smaller community-based programs that might not need to be funded by the government. If there is a recession, that you have resiliency in small-based funders. And then they also felt there was a need to identify funding mechanisms to support climate action. So again, another one that was similar in and they had a couple of recommendations. So that could Again, not as in depth as the one developed by the building energy use, but a couple suggestions on alternative funding mechanisms.
Thanks for giving
So
us
I
that.
take it back, this is a good outline. I've been working on policing, that's the reason I haven't read this. Can we reuse the outline because I think it would work on what we're looking at in terms of community reactions to policing, and I don't know what CSU's intellectual property is in the outline, so I don't want to steal it.
No, it was created for you as part of, for the city as part of the deliverables, and that's the equity lens is your property. As
Okay, so I could take this and suggest it to people who are working on a different project.
Yes, and I can let Francie speak for this as well, but as I understand the development of the Just Transitions Plan Committee and the future of that committee, their intention was never to focus exclusively on climate action. It so happened that shortly after the Just Transitions Plan Committee was created, the climate emergency resolution was passed, and that became a way for them to focus their efforts. And that there are a number of other groups within the city who are interested in engaging this group and gaining their insight into how to address diverse populations within the community.
So they might be interested in working on the question of whether policing, whether social services should be in or out of the police, for example.
Potentially. Marcia, if you don't mind, with that group, we're kind of going to reset and then move forward. So if you don't mind sending me, if you have like a couple sentences of where you might think this group could go, feel free to send that to me. But I also want to make sure we don't go too off track with everyone else today.
No, I don't want to hijack this meeting. I just wanted to know if the outline could be presented. Thanks.
Does anyone have any questions, or can I go ahead and stop sharing this and we can go back to Josie's presentation?
Is this the same text that was included in the draft that we saw?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
So is there further, so Francie, I think you can stop sharing now. And thank you for doing that. I think it is helpful to take it out of abstraction and make it more concrete. Are there others in the group who would like to express your thoughts in support of or concerns regarding including the recommendations that Francie went through as part of the climate action report? Yes, Karen.
I would just, I read an article recently, and I'll send that to Lisa and Francine, where it talked about you can't solve climate crisis without dealing with the underlying racism, because racism is really about having disposable people. And if you have disposable people, you have disposable areas that are polluted. And until we figure out how to solve some of the underlying issues, we'll never be able to really truly engage on climate change. So I think it's a good idea to have it in there. I like where it's placed, and I like the way the statements are. They don't detract from, they add to, I believe. I think it's a good report to have there.
Ollie?
Yeah, I feel very strongly that this should be in for the reasons that Karen highlighted and others highlighted too. And also because it's already difficult that people are going to read one report, go figure, read two reports. So I think if it's combined in one, it's more likely that people are going to actually read it.
Hi, this is Joni on the phone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Joni.
Okay. I agree. I see what Peter and Marcia are saying. I understand in terms of not losing focus and muddying the waters and whatnot. But I do feel that the JTP plan recommendations should be in the appendix, as part of the appendices, for various reasons. And some of it has to do with my job. I'm 75% of my job now is building structures for people to be able to participate in programming at the Hour Center, rather than it being like a top-down hierarchy. Having our participants have more of a voice in how programs are run, and definitely taking into account diversity and equity and the Spanish-speaking community especially. But anyhow, because I'm in this like almost all the time, to me, I'm going to have to weigh on the side of including it in the appendices. That's my vote. Thanks.
Joni, can I clarify from you, and it may be helpful for the rest of the group as well. So currently, and I want to be clear on if you're suggesting going with the proposed idea or if you're making an alternative one. So the proposed idea is to include a summary of the just transitions or the equity aspects in the main body of the document, and then include the full report as an appendix. And I wanted to clarify if you're in support of that, or if you're suggesting that it's included only as an appendix with a reference, only a reference to the material in the body of the document.
I think it should be in the appendix, but that would be part of a single report, correct? Even if everything is, yeah. So in other words, what Francie just put up, you're saying what Francie just put up would be in the main body of the report with our recommendations. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So the way, so the current idea, and we can, this is part of the discussion right now, but just because it's a little bit to get everyone's head around, the current idea is that there would be, the executive summary, a project overview with some history and context, and then the summary recommendations from the task force. So that would be all the titles, the SMART goals, and a couple sentence summary of the recommendation. So that would all be in the main body of the report. The suggestion is to include also the table that we just looked at only in the main body of the report in its own sort of chapter, if you will. So there would be a chapter that's the front matter, a chapter that's the climate action recommendations, a chapter that are the summary equity recommendations, and then there would be appendices in the back that would be the full recommendations as written by the task force, as well as the full equity lens and the full equity report as an appendices. So the summary information for both that, as well as the outreach, by the way, would be all inclusive into the front matter of the report, the main body of the report, and then more detailed appendices for the full recommendations, the full equity, and perhaps a little bit more. Actually, I'm questioning that, Francie, on how much of the outreach report would be as an appendices as well.
Okay, then I'm not suggesting a new format. I'm agreeing with what you outlined originally before this even broke down into a discussion. And but I do think this is pretty important. I know there's only 9 or 10 of us, or 11 maybe now on this call, but this is a pretty big deal. for the climate, for, you know, that this is now also going to be part of the final report. I know how I feel, but I think it's so important that everybody really needs to weigh in. And I hate to say it, should this come to another vote, like in a few more days, or what, you know? Sorry to go down.
Yeah, no, that's okay, Joni. Our intention is to try to get to a vote tonight. We did agree early on that we're looking for a sort of super majority. So we're looking for a consensus-based approach where we can get everyone to be, or at least 80% to be, you know, pretty much, you know, thumbs up or mostly thumbs up with the idea. So that is our intention this evening. Lisa, did you want to add something?
No, I just was saying, I think, or counting folks, I think we might have a quorum now, but also I just wanted to reiterate that when we kind of put sort of, I know we didn't say exactly this structure was what we were proposing in that email that I sent, but essentially what I had sent was that, you know, we wanted to have the Just Transition Plan Committee decide how they wanted things to be incorporated. And the vast majority of people that responded to that said that they were good with that. So this is our proposal to address that. I think if the majority of folks who are on the call tonight feel okay moving that forward, I'm happy to put it out to the rest of the group via email, but I do feel pretty confident that kind of we already had some of that discussion and that people were supportive of that.
Well, Lisa, I withdraw my objection after that presentation. I don't think that the equity lens does mess up the message of the actual recommendations. And I agree with you that having it present will improve acceptance of what we're proposing. So, you know, I'll be a yes if we take a vote now.
For clarifying, Marcia. Is there anyone particularly who hasn't spoken yet that would like to share your thoughts or concerns at this time? Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what's been said. I think it's important to include it in, and I think you've done a good job of how you incorporate it into the document, and the idea of kind of putting the summary into the document and then putting the entire piece as an appendices. So I would vote for it as well.
Thank you, Phil. Anyone else? Okay, so I will take the silence as an indication that we are ready to take a vote. So what we are voting on right now is to include the summary of the Just Transitions Plan Committee work in the main body of the Climate Action Task Force recommendations report, and to include the remainder of that report as an appendices to the main report. So if anyone is opposed or thumbs down, does anyone have any conditions? Thumbs sideways. And I would take that to be all in favor for those who are present. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for drawing on your good thinking and listening and communication skills to work through that particular conversation. Okay, the last main order of business that we have for this evening is the presentation to council. So we're going to talk a little bit about the format for that, as well as who the potential presenters might be. So getting started with that, as you all know, the recommendations are going to be presented in two sections, in two different council meetings. So there will be the round one recommendations presented at the first council meeting, and then the round two recommendations presented at the second council meeting. There will likely be about 20 minutes to present in each session, although the first session will probably be a little bit more packed in that it will have both the introduction and overview for the work, as well as the round one recommendations. We can talk about fine tuning that a little bit if needed, but let's just say that the general plan is that the first half of the recommendations, also known as the round one recommendations, would be presented at the first council meeting, and the second round of recommendations, including governance, would be presented at the second council meeting. After the presentation would be discussion by council, and then to kick off the presentation, Lisa would introduce the background for the climate action resolution, as well as equity and community engagement. And then what we're looking for related to the presenters in the presentation is which task force members and/or if Lisa should present the recommendations. So to say that another way, would any of the people from the task force like to present to council some of the recommendations, with the understanding that there will be about 5 minutes per subgroup to be able to present? So if your subgroup had 5 recommendations, that would be approximately 1 minute per recommendation. So even though we are spreading this out over 2 council sessions, there's still a very large amount of content to be delivered. So presentations will by nature need to be very concise, and we won't have time likely for each person to present one recommendation in sequence, if for no other reason than the logistics of moving all the people around to do that is going to be very time consuming. At any rate, I'm not trying to tell you all how to do this. I'm more just making sure that we're all on the same page about really how much time is available, so that you can inform your thinking about how you'd like to present. So Karen, it looks like you've got something to say.
I would just say that given that council meetings aren't live, I think it would be very difficult to get that number of people to be able to give a report. It would be very cumbersome, I think, to have that 3 people give 1 minute each. That's cumbersome even if you are in attendance and you're standing at a podium. I would suggest that Lisa do the presentation and that the rest of us be available on phone. I think it would just be cumbersome. It's hard to even call in and do public invited to be heard. There's a real lag in the phone piece.
Although I think there should be a single presenter, but we could invite a group this size on Zoom. So you wouldn't have to be on the cumbersome laggy phone thing. You could be in the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, that's a good point, Marcia. So if we have the presenters lined up ahead of time, we can get you plugged into that so that you have access like we have access right now. But I do think it is a fair point, Karen, that this venue is not as easy as it would be if we were there in person at City Council. So I do think that is something to take into consideration.
maybe we could be on Zoom and be available and yet have one person present. I just think it would be, it's very difficult to, knowing just from trying to get people who are all lined up in a line ready to speak, it just causes delays, and that will make a long report even longer. Although it might make it more interesting to have a bunch of different people engaged too. So maybe after the final PowerPoint is completed, you might think, Lisa, about whether or not you wanted others engaged to help you with some section of it. Maybe some of the more technical ones or something.
Are you comfortable with that, Lisa?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that. I feel fine with that. I present to council, you know, all the time. I would want to make sure that you guys are available because you all are the authors of these recommendations. And if there are specific questions about some of the technical pieces or some of the details or where did this come from or whatnot, I would want to make sure that you guys are available to answer that, because I'm not going to be able to speak to that level of detail. But yeah, I'm fine with that.
And Marcia, are you comfortable that that would be a good way to put it forward?
Yes.
Since you're on
It's,
the receiving end, so you would.
I'm on both ends, so
Right.
I can always ask for clarification if it's needed.
Right.
Is there anyone who feels compelled to present some or all of the recommendations? Okay, not seeing anyone rush forward.
Nobody's jumping on that.
I mean, I think that in some ways, Lisa, you certainly present sort of a third-party participant. I mean, a very engaged, but you know, none of them were the particular groups or efforts that you were involved in, and you're quite familiar with all of the content. It sounds like that's where the group is as far as the presentation is concerned. So we have a draft presentation that will be updated with any revisions that are made in the report over the coming few days. So that will, that will assure that the content is as it should be. And then this group's focus really is about assuring one more time that that's really ready to go, and it really reflects all of the hard work and effort that you each have put into creating those recommendations over the past 5 months or so. So great. Well, I think that, last piece on the presentation. So the Just Transitions Plan Committee was asked how and when they would like to present their work. And they felt that the best place for them to present their work would be at the second session on July 7th, after the Climate Action Task Force presentation. So essentially there would be the first session on, what's the date for that one?
June 30th.
So the first half would be presented on June 30th, the second half on July 7th, and then after the Climate Action Task Force presentations were done, then the Just Transitions Plan Committee is going to request an agenda item to give a brief presentation of their recommendations. does anyone have any concerns with that approach? And Phil
We
said
might, Phil.
Phil said in the chat that that city may be back in chambers by the 7th.
Just a heads up that there might be some opportunity for public to be part of the process. I'm sure it'll look very different than we've ever seen it before. So I don't know what that's going to look like at all.
Yeah, I am not thrilled about being back in chambers that soon myself.
Right. And that might be part of the discussion, the vote.
Sounds like a bad idea, yeah.
Yeah. So to Karen's point, I'm pregnant and will be very pregnant by then. So I would also probably not be looking to be there in person. So that's something that I'll make sure to figure out is kind of move back into this space of opening things up. Are we still accommodating participation from folks that are high risk and are still not comfortable being out more in public spaces with a lot of people around? So I'm sensitive to that as well, and we'll figure that out.
Practically the whole council is high risk.
So I think I jumped topics a little bit quickly. So let's confirm. I think let me just go back and confirm that the intention is that Lisa would present and that as many of you as possible would be in attendance and available to respond to questions if and when necessary. And that clearly we'll be working through either a completely virtual circumstance and perhaps unlikely circumstance where it would be mandatory to be in person. So it'd either be all virtual or a hybrid environment for the presentation. So that will have to get worked out. But I just wanted to, so I think we all got to a definitive yes on Lisa will present. You all will make an effort to be in attendance as possible to support the recommendations and the discussion period as needed. And then the second piece of that was mostly to inform you all that the Just Transition Committee is interested in presenting after the climate action recommendations on the 7th. And does that whole package sound like a good plan to everyone? Okay. And then I think that, okay, so before we move into wrap up and next steps, I think there's also just a little bit of unfinished business around maybe reviewing the final report. So Ali, you said that you still needed a little bit of additional time, but that you would like some time to finalize your review of the report.
I do, yes.
Are there a couple of others that are in the same boat? All right, I'm seeing a couple of hands waving. Okay, so I think Francie, can you clarify for us what still works for you to keep within the time frame that you're working on?
Yeah, the end of the day on Sunday, the 14th, would be feasible if that gives people, about 3 more days. We could still do it in that time frame. But if you are going to submit if they're pretty major comments, at least give us a heads up that that's coming, because then I'll block out more of my time next week.
Yeah, no, personally, I don't think there is anything major from my side. I skimmed through it, and I don't think there's anything major, but I do want to read it and give my small contribution to the final version.
I have very minor comments for the plan and for the presentation, but they're very minor.
This might be a place we kind of skipped over that suggestion earlier about maybe some kind of cover statement. And
yes, I was going to get back to that too.
if you
Peter.
want
Thanks for
to, I
bringing
mean,
that
I don't know
up.
if it would plug in here, but in terms of timeline, if you want me to try to draft a paragraph or something, and that could get to you, Francie, so you could circulate it with the rest of the finished draft, and then people could decide whether they wanted to include it or change it or leave it out. Does that sound too complicated, or?
It would have to be pretty rushed, since we are planning to submit to the full report a week from today to City Council. So I don't know, Peter, if you're able to draft it tomorrow, or even that would, if you have time to do that tomorrow, then we could get it to folks, and then people have the weekend to look at it. I think that might give us enough time to try to add it, and then I guess, well, it might be a good question to those who are here. If you do not have time to review it, do you feel comfortable approving it without looking at it?
Having seen Peter's letter to the editor a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago, time gets weird in quarantine, right? I would trust him. I would also read it, but I would trust him myself.
Same here.
My thought would be that I would go back to that letter and try to pull that out and say that we've worked hard and that the virus has made it tougher, but it's also made us think of these analogies between that problem and the climate problem, which is even bigger. And that this is what we've come up with. I've taken a few notes on things people have said. If I could work those in, I'll do it. If it doesn't work, we'll set it aside.
I would very much appreciate Peter's effort.
Okay, I'll try to get something to you tomorrow.
Thank you, Peter.
Yep.
Okay, so I just want to confirm that we did sort of take a vote on the report, understanding that there's still a little bit of tweaking to happen, but that still holds as a general approval of the recommendations and the content of the report moving forward, and that has not shifted. And I think that's a rhetorical question, but you know, we are kind of at the end here and want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with the content and the understood direction of the content in a way that Lisa and Francie can present a final product to council a week from today. So again, unless we hear objections, we'll assume that everyone is still good with the path forward. Okay. Well, wrap up and next steps. I think, you know, I might take, let's see. So as we just discussed, the final report will go to, yeah, so this Sunday, Any full report revisions to staff. Peter will circulate something hopefully by end of day tomorrow for the cover letter, the front letter. And then staff will submit the final report to council next Thursday. The first presentation to council will be on the 30th, and the second presentation to council will be on the 7th, and the Just Transitions Committee will present on that day as well. And then remember, from a governance perspective, this group is encouraged to follow the Sustainability Advisory Committee, to continue to stay engaged. Some of you may wish to apply for a position on that. Sorry, is it a commission, a council?
It's an advisory board.
Advisory board, okay. Sorry, my brain's getting a little messy too.
Are you talking about technical committees to actually take the planning forward? What advisory board are you talking about, Lisa?
The Sustainability Advisory Board.
That part of the governance recommendation was to continue to follow that group, and that some of you may wish to apply to be members of that group at some future date. And then in addition to that, there will be technical advisory groups who may be participating in the planning and implementation of some of these recommendations. But this is the last formal gathering of this configuration of people. And so we can take a moment and just celebrate the important and sometimes challenging but very meaningful work that you all have been involved in over the past 5.5 months to help shape the future of your community and of our broader community in Colorado and beyond. So I just wanted to thank you all for letting us be part of that journey with you. I commend each of you for the heart and the caring that you bring to your community and to the work that we've done. So it's really been a pleasure to get to work with you all and to get to know you a little bit. So thank you for that. And if anyone else is inclined, we have a few minutes that you could share your appreciation or thoughts or reflections for the group.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I just want to thank you all so much for your time and effort. I know you all signed up to be part of this because you're passionate about it, but I also know it was probably a lot more work than I think folks had anticipated. But I just got an email from Ocean. He was hoping to join us and he had an emergency situation come up, but wanted to tell me how impressed he was with the report and how proud he feels of the work that this group has done. So I wanted to share that. I wanted to say a huge thank you to Josie and Helen and David and Jacob and their team for all of the support that they brought to this process. And a huge thank you to Francie, who has been holding a lot of this together for us and all of these logistics that are so many details that folks can't even imagine. And there's no way that we would have been able to do it without her. And so I want to give her a big round of applause and then thank you. And to all of you, this is awesome. I'm really excited to be taking this to council, and I'm excited even more for the next steps.
This is when it's really hard to be on Zoom instead of, being able to have a group hug. So a group hug, everybody.
Agreed.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks for leading us. Good to see you. Bye-bye.
I think
Bye, everyone.
this is great.